Fred?
Well, hi.
Hey, Fred.
Hi. I can't see anybody, so it's an interesting thing when you sit up and stand on a stage like this. You know, I was reflecting, just like, I'm a forgiveness teacher, which in this world is a very strange thing to be. Because nobody comes generally to listen to things about forgiveness because life has been too good to them. Which is an interesting thing. Like, I never get people tell me, you know, I need to forgive my husband because he's too sweet. No, or I never get to forgive my brother-in-law because he gave me money. Or I never get to forgive because it's more than I asked for. What people come and listen to forgiveness people about is because life turned out to be less than they asked for. And it's just interesting to reflect on that we don't remark when it's more, but we complain and feel frustrated or angry or missing something when it's less. And that's a crux of an issue that we all struggle with. You know, and being a forgiveness teacher, I get invited to places where life has handed people less. And I have spoken quite a few times for this organization where many of you have been handed quite less than you wished. And it's a very deep issue. Like, what do we do when life is harder than we hoped it would be? And there's no real easy answer. I mean, I'm one of those people who gets invited by magazines to give easy answers. You know, like the 4 steps to this, and the 6 steps to a tighter butt, or whatever. whatever the question is, they expect people like me to have really simple answers.
No.
And for things like some of the stuff that many of you are dealing with, there is no simple answer. But there's an existential looking that I have found very helpful when I think about that, and that's basically that nobody on this earth gets out without a lot of pain, and that life is hard, and that all of us suffer. And what kind of resilience and character do we have to deal with the suffering that we've been given is a very challenging question, but it's the question that we all have to deal with. That, you know, we don't know what form the suffering or pain is going to take, but we know it's going to come. And the question often for one's mental health is, how well do we integrate our suffering into our life so that we can have the best life possible? And it's really hard to do that if you don't forgive. It's just really hard. Because, like for many of you and for many people, just dealing with life itself is hard enough. But if you're pissed off or feel like a victim or feel like life's been unfair, and you add that just to this difficulty of living your life, it tips the balance. And the work I do is, you know, there's no easy cure for many of the stuff you guys have faced. But there are things to do around the edges that make it easier, and the first is just a very basic understanding of there's nothing for certain, there's nothing guaranteed, and there's not usually that much easy about getting through, you know, 0 to death on this planet. And the question is really what like ice cream flavor of problem did you get? You know, did you get chocolate? So that means there's something wrong with your health, or vanilla, which means you got a crappy spouse, or strawberry, you got a lying, cheating, business partner, or just, the most routine, which is you had a nice, good life, and then one day you wake up dead. It's like stuff's gonna happen.
Wake up dead, I like that.
And so at its most basic form, we need to lighten up a little. That it's just a flavor of suffering that we have. It's not suffering itself, because everybody has that. Everybody. There's that very famous Buddhist story about the woman, her baby dies very unexpectedly, and she's absolutely bereft and miserable. And she runs to the Buddha and says, look, my son died. This is a horror. And the Buddha says, well, I'll be happy to talk with you. Just go to the homes in the little village and get a piece of rice from every home, from any home that death hasn't visited. And, she comes back with no rice. And the teaching aspect of that is, the ubiquity of suffering and the necessity of having compassion for not just our pain, but the pain, for the human pain. And that's the structure upon which people who have been wounded or hurt or disappointed deeply, it's called post-traumatic growth. That they take a trauma and literally their heart opens because of it. Because somehow they're able to shift that trauma from just my wound to the wound. That, yes, I have been devastated. And again, this is not the first time I've given a talk here for this group, or not these specific people. And I've heard a number of the stories that many of you have had to deal with. And so I'm not minimizing the horror, the anguish, the discomfort, the social difficulties. And I'm also suggesting that at some level, that's also emblematic of human suffering. I remember once giving a class at Stanford where I teach on forgiveness. And I was talking for maybe, 30 seconds. And some woman jumps up out of I don't know what she's doing. She jumps up and starts to basically tell me, forgiveness is a really good idea, but you wouldn't have suggested it if you had been married to my husband. That was her point. It took her, she listened maybe for a minute to what I was saying, and she got the point that, okay, this guy wants us to forgive. So the minute she heard that, it was like, yeah, it's a good idea, but if you had been married to this bum, you'd never recommend forgiveness. So I asked her this. I didn't know what to say. My mind was thinking that the husband was really lucky not to be married to her anymore. That's what my mind was thinking. But I didn't say that. And he's probably in a vacation in Hawaii right now with somebody nice, and she's still jumping up and down complaining. But I asked her if she read the newspaper. That was my response to her. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, yeah, I read the Chronicle every now and then. This is in San Francisco. And I said, well, what's in the newspaper? And she said, well, news and, all sorts of disasters and stuff. And then I said, yeah, do you ever watch the TV news? And she said, yeah, every now and then I'll see CNN or Fox or something. And I said, well, what's on that? She said, the same stuff, people being bad to each other and murders and stuff like that. And I said, so if that's the news, Like, how were you so shocked that you had a crappy husband? Like, didn't you get it? That this is a lot of what happens here. And then the question is, what do you do with it? And I suggested to her that her hostility about her husband was not the best way to deal with having been hurt. That if she wanted to grow in certain qualities, she had to open her heart back up. And I made the same suggestion to some of you. That there is a natural tendency when we've been violated or mistreated or scarred in any way, physically or emotionally, to want to tighten in and hold ourselves tightly to protect ourselves. And while that's necessary for a short period of time to integrate the tragedy or integrate the pain, long term, it turns out to be a very poor strategy. Because it turns out that you can't just shut down the negative experiences. If we could do that, life would be so much easier. But by closing in on ourselves and tightening down and mistrusting and just trying to put a thing over our head, we shut down both some of the pain and some of the pleasure that you can't selectively shut down. And so less goodness comes into view. And the kindness of other people becomes less apparent. And the good fortune of simply being alive misses some of it. Yes, you are able to dampen some of the sadness and some of the fear and some of the anger. You can put a lid on that. But the lid also goes on joy. And the lid also goes on gratitude. And so there are other strategies. There are other more resourceful strategies, but they all involve that transitional point of, I forgive this. I, as an adult, make a decision that I'm no longer going to be angry because I was harmed. That I'm going to accept that. And I'm going to wear it as my cross or whatever it is, whatever way you hold that. But I accept it. And I accept it in part so that I can be more empathic to all the other people and the wounds that they're holding. And that's one of the ways that we can transition out of victimhood, as hard as that is we accept the wound and the pain and the awfulness that's in our life. And that's no easy challenge, but it is, again, in the research around resilience and in the research around who makes post-traumatic growth, that's at the heart of it. Like, I no longer identify myself as somebody singled out. I'm no longer special because of my pain. That's not how I need to hold it, even though my own particular pain may brand me as something different. But there's not that identification in the same way with it, that it's part of what happens. And what that does, believe it or not, is that kind of acceptance leads our body to produce less adrenaline. And it produces less stress chemicals. It produces less anguish physically. Because when we are identified with our wound, and we hold it as kind of a unique badge of usually horror or shame, then we are constantly producing adrenaline around that to protect us from that vulnerability. You know, we're constantly on guard. And so this very, not simple, but this clear examination of, is my suffering and pain really unique? Or is it just my flavor? Or is it just my particular form of Earth's and life's difficulty? And if you're honest, most of the time you'll come up with, yes, it's just my flavor, as hard as it is. Now just to let you know that we all try to make our flavor the worst flavor. I remember in a forgiveness class, I once asked a group of 30 people, so tell me, which is harder to forgive? A hurt that's done to you by someone you love, or a hurt that's done to you by someone you don't know? So is it worse to have, like, your husband cheating on you because you come home and he's in bed with the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders? All 26 of them, or whatever. Or is it worse that you get hit by a hit-and-run driver that you don't know? Which is worse? And people deliberated it for a while, and it turned out that they thought what was worse what happened to them. That's how they define worse, because who knows? So the people for whom the difficulty stemmed from somebody close to them, they would say, well, it's so much harder to forgive close people because you trust them. And then other people would say, it's so much harder to forgive somebody you don't know because you don't know them. It all depended on what was on their plate. And then I asked, okay, so which is harder to forgive or deal with? Stuff that's recent or stuff that happened long ago? And again, it divided depending on when their particular brand of awful was. So those who had just been hurt or disappointed, they said, of course it's harder to deal with something that just happened. It just happened. And somebody else would say, no, you don't get it. You had a whole good life. You're just slammed at 39 or 50. I've lived with this since I've been 9. It's much harder. And so what this story is our minds create, and I'll explain a little more about this, our minds create problem dramas out of whatever it is we're struggling with. And the left hemisphere of our brain, it turns out its purpose is to weave a story mostly around what's difficult in our life, so we can have language to try to deal with it. However, the left hemisphere, its way of handling that is to generally make the story as bad as possible. Because what we want to do is have a story that's so compelling that we don't allow ourselves to be distracted from trying to deal with it. So again, if you have, as many of you do, serious injuries, your mind wants to make sure that you are focused on that injury so you get help and that you learn how to cope with it. And that is actually what adrenaline does. It focuses your attention on a problem. That is the purpose of adrenaline. The purpose of adrenaline is pumped out of our adrenal glands directly into our bloodstream so we can't be distracted from dealing with something threatening. That's its purpose. Now, the problem is if you're dealing with adrenaline for 5 years or 10 years, then it starts wrecking your body and it starts wrecking your mind. But on the way to get there, the left hemisphere or the language centers of our brain, they're coming up with stories that make sure that adrenaline doesn't get too far away as long as there's still a problem. It doesn't want us to be at peace. Because the neural architecture that you and I have is first and foremost designed to keep us alive and safe, not to make us happy. So your primitive neurology is for survival. It's not to make you happy. And the problem is that for many of us, these survival strategies, after a while, not just don't make us happy, but make us unhappy. Because the most primitive part of you doesn't care if you're happy or not. It just waits to try to make you get through till tomorrow. And so we are struggling, in particular if we're scarred or wounded or if we have a deep, deep trauma, we're just struggling to try to figure out how we cope. But the tools we have, because they're so primitive, don't lead to great strategies. They tend to lead to fear and anxiety and anger. And those are not great long-term strategies. So the two simple things that one can do as a practice that will lead to be more forgiving is, and again, I know that you know about this, I'm simply reiterating it from maybe a little different perspective, is we have to learn how to relax in the midst of our pain. We have to learn how to be able to shut down our body's overreactivity. So just as a practice, I'm going to lead us, you, me, in just a couple of minutes of a guided meditation. Because I want to show you where in your body forgiveness comes from, not just in your mind. So if everybody would, while I'm working up here, if you all close your eyes for a minute, I'm going to do a guided meditation practice. Because I'd rather you've got a little taste of it, not just listened to me talk about it. And so what I'd like you is to get comfortable, sit somewhat relaxed, and then be in a position where you can, if possible, not move around much for the next couple of minutes. And then what I'd like you to do is kind of drop into watching your breathing for the purpose of slowing it down a little bit. Just slowing it down. What you want to do is breathe just a little more deeply and slowly. And what that will require is for you to relax your abdominal muscle. What that will require is that you will, within a couple of breaths, you will allow your belly and abdomen to open. That means get bigger and expand as you inhale. And it also means that it will contract when you exhale. So you want to breathe in and fill your belly with air. And you want to exhale and expel the air. And you want to do so, and this is the key piece, you want to keep your shoulders and your chest and the rest of you hardly moving at all. That's the key practice. You want the rest of you to hardly budge. That you want to locate your attention in your abdomen, in your diaphragm. And the practice that is so useful is to relax the rest of your body so that any aspect of fight or flight or danger is not there for you. That you're safe, and that you're comfortable, and that you're just breathing the way nature intended you to breathe. Nature intended you, when there's no threat, to breathe slowly and deeply. And I believe that nature intended for us to enjoy this breathing, to quiet down enough so that it's pleasurable to be alive. And so that's the practice for a moment or two, is to breathe quietly and deeply enough so that there's no need at all for your body to be in danger. So you don't need any adrenaline in your system. And you don't need to be, like, frightened. So you can sit very quietly and with stillness and breathe as if you're safe. Breathe as if you're safe. Because this is the physiologic practice that can help train our mind that we're safe. and that we're okay. That we don't need to be anxious. And then, but before we're done, what I'd like you to do is, before we finish, don't open your eyes yet. Just let go of your attention to your belly and bring your mind to an image of someone you absolutely adore. Someone you're crazy about, that you just love. Bring your mind to an image of someone you absolutely love. And picture them as delicious as you're capable of picturing them. And I want you to picture them. This is not a moment to be, oh, I don't like them. Just love them. I want you to picture an image that has you feel love. And I'd like you to see if you can feel that love as you sit here. And I want you to see if you can feel it and almost hold it in your heart. That as we sit here together, each of us is capable of quieting down and remembering something really, really beautiful. So that your body gets the message that it's okay. That life is okay. Maybe just for a minute, but it's okay. And then you're okay. And then I'd like you to let go of that image. And take one more breath and then allow your eyes to open. And then bring your attention back to me. Now, the reason I do practices like that is, as long as we're filled with adrenaline, as long as we're all fidgety, as long as we're worried about the future or concerned about what other people think or scared about our health, then those physical experiences will make happiness very, very challenging. And they'll make forgiveness almost impossible. Because one of the effects of adrenaline, one of the effects of stress, is that it changes the blood flow in the brain. It does all sorts of things. So you really can't be happy. And when that becomes a habit, it becomes very challenging. So the conduit, like when you were sitting there and you were quieter and more peaceful, then the part of you that already knows how to forgive is available. It's not available when you're upset or angry or scared. But when you focus on something that's good, the part of you that can forgive, that lets go, and you recognize the letting go by the absence of tension. When you let go, you're at peace. And then it's just, you have a life. And then what needs to be constructed into that life is a story that is helpful to you. So it's a dual practice of quieting down whenever possible, so that you remind your body over and over and over again that no matter what might have happened to you, you can still be safe. You don't have to clench. And you can be at peace. And then you need a story to tell that makes that possible. And that's where many of us get stuck, because we have stories to tell that make being at peace harder. Victim stories, rage stories, despair stories. stories about how terrible something is or something was. Those are all stories that pump massive amounts of adrenaline into your body. Those are not stories that will help you be able to look forward with hope. Now again, these are left hemisphere driven things designed to save your life. But they're not designed to give you a happy life, or at least a possible happy life. And there's a tension there. There's a real tension there. Because at some level, many of you have been harmed. And at some level, some or many of you may have been harmed by other people's negligence, or your own negligence. And there's a truth to that. However, after a while, that truth becomes dangerous to you. Because you can't repeat that truth without deepening the neural pathways that keep it in place. And that is a very subtle but clear necessity, is to not get trapped in neural pathways of thinking that make you unhappy, or that make resilience or recovery or hope more difficult. So within quieting down, there is then the possibility of creating a new neural pathway with different stories. But those have to be practiced. And they have to be practiced in conjunction with quieting down, or the neural pathways of stress will take you over. You know, one of the things that's interesting about being a human being is the pathways that we have of stress are like 8-lane superhighways. They are. Any problem that you have, that information gets to your processing center like this. I mean, way before that finger snap, even before I fully thought about snapping my fingers, if there's any thread in my life, it's already in here, way before even the motor neuron got to this. That's how quickly it is. And whatever it is, the neural pathways are wide and paved, and you know, they're freshly paved, and it doesn't matter if it snows. But the pathways that send good information, they are really bumpy little roads. They are. Because it doesn't matter for your survival if they get there. Like, you can have all the nice flowers in the world, and you can smell them, and you notice how pretty they are. But if a truck comes at you while you're smelling them, you want those 8-lane superhighways to knock you out of the way and get you away from the truck. So your brain is designed to have information that's threatening get there no matter what. And information that's pleasant, well, if it gets there, it's fine. So you have to work at it. And you have to create a story about your life that makes working at it make sense. You know, otherwise, you're not going to do it. Because your story, the basic way you define yourself and talk about your life, orients you. And even helps you select what it is that you see in the world. Well, I'm a lucky person. So then you look for good fortune. Nothing good ever happens to me. Well, then you look for crap.
Yeah.
It is, because the story, like, we are defined by a story, because again, the left hemisphere needs to create a drama that we can organize ourselves around.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's chaos. And so you want to be very careful that that drama is a helpful one. Okay, I'm going to give you one more meditation practice, and maybe this one will be a little more focused. So again, if you would all close your eyes for one more moment. Just close your eyes, and again, you know, move around your neck and your shoulders if you need to make sure you're comfy. And then take just 2 or 3 slow, full, deep breaths into and out of your belly, please. Just take 2 really slow, full, deep breaths. And you want to almost exaggerate the process of breathing slowly and deeply so that you sink into it in a way that you enjoy. It's like there's the cultivation you're awakening the cultivation of peacefulness and safety. The cultivation of safety. And then here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to pick something in your life that you struggle with. Maybe something that brought you to this conference. But what I'd like you to do is see it differently. What I'd like you to do is create a mental picture of yourself handling something of difficulty really well. Like we're practicing something called visualizing success. So forgiveness is, from my definition now, a very simple, definition of forgiveness is making peace with the word no. So forgiveness has nothing to do necessarily with the individual struggle that each of you has. Like, that's the drama. That's like when I used to watch soap operas, I watched All My Children for years. So that's All My Children. I watched All My Children for years. So that's your All My Children stuff. I watch General Hospital too, but not quite as often. But All My Children, that's the drama. And that's the filler. But outside the filler is the problem, and can you cope with it? And the problem is generally that life didn't turn out the way you want. That's the problem. And many of us get really angry or frustrated because life didn't match the picture of what we hoped it would be. And the difference between the picture and reality is generally how much suffering you have. So if your picture is bright and cheery and beautiful and your reality is not, then that gap is huge. And that causes enormous pain when your picture of how it should be is so different from how it is. And forgiveness is learning to make peace with the fact that you don't always get what you want. That you often don't get what you want. And that part of being a resilient adult is to make peace with not getting what you want. But it's not about just the individual pain of, I have this problem, I have this hurt, I had this burn, this particular thing. It's developing the muscle of coping with no. Because that will serve you through your whole life. And it makes you much hardier. It makes you able to deal with the next difficulty. And it makes you able to help other people, because you can empathize with their problems. Well, I had this huge no. So forgiveness is making peace with the word no. And again, it will never happen when you're filled with adrenaline or stress. It just won't happen. And it will never happen when your storyline is, look at how terrible my life is. Just look at how bad it is. And look at how much better everybody else's is. That will make sure you're never at peace. Ever. And so the two ways primarily that we get people to be able to open, to be able to tell a different story, one that's much more peaceful, is quieting down and starting to open up the neural pathways of goodness, of good visions, of heart-open stuff, of love, of beauty, of flowers, so that your brain is wired more than its primitive programming to help you see the good. And it's designed so that the story you have, and this is so poignant with so many of the things that I've worked with, so that the story you have is about moving ahead, not lamenting what happened. That's the forgiveness piece. It's not about why you're here. I mean, it is for a while. But it's about what you're going to do with the rest of your days. And everybody's got some story. I mean, that's just the truth. If you scratch a little bit, everybody's got a story. Yesterday, I don't even know if it's yesterday because I fly enough, but maybe it's somewhere around yesterday. In the vicinity of yesterday. I was talking to a student. You know, I teach. And she was telling me about something that had happened in her family, about a suicide attempt. And how the family member blamed her for the attempt because of how terrible she had been. And this is a perfectly nice woman in her 30s. Who would know? You know, if I didn't get a chance to talk with her, who would know about her suffering? But I asked. I mean, not for that, but I asked. And then another friend of mine, an actual friend of mine, was telling me that not that long ago he found out that his wife had some kind of affair. And how would you know? So some of you wear your wounds on the outside because that's what happened to you. And some of us just wear our wounds on the inside and those can't be seen as easily. But everybody's got them. And we need to a little bit disentangle ourselves from our wounds so that we can see everybody's wounds. Well, not everybody's, but a number of people's wounds. And then we can fashion a story that helps us figure out what to do with tomorrow or today, rather than just lamenting what happened or led us to our current difficulty. That story, after a while, is unfortunate because it creates such huge neural pathways of struggle. And it becomes very difficult to change that story if it's too deeply in. So the last thing that I would just want to yak about for just a moment is the compassion that is really helpful when you're thinking about a new story. Because a good story to move ahead with is always compassionate towards us. It's always compassionate towards us. It allows a full flavor of what our suffering has been. It just doesn't stop there. But it's not a story that doesn't include it deeply. It's just one that opens back up to tomorrow. And so instead of either blaming oneself for being stuck or struggling, which is normal when you've been harmed. I mean, it's normal to blame yourself for struggle. But the good story is one where we are compassionate towards our predicament, towards our pain. But we don't stop there. It's like, yeah, I really, really had a difficult experience to deal with. And it took all of me, and at times it buried me. But that's not the end. That's just a piece in mid-story. And then there's a compassion and a forgiveness that's in the story about what comes next. It's like, what am I going to do with my wounds? And who am I going to help? Because I understand more deeply now what suffering is about, and what pain is about, and what troubles are. And what am I going to do with this? And the practice of coming up with a useful story is the therapy. That's the forgiveness therapy. Is what do I do? How do I work it out? And so you want to try out different stories. You want to experiment with your life, and you want to experiment with how it is you language your life until you find one that fits. You know, one that says, wow, okay, this is who I like myself to be. This is the good Fred. You know, not the whiny Fred, which the whiny Fred's never going to go away. But you just don't want to give them top billing. You want to find a good Fred. You know, whatever your name is, you want to find a story that helps you find your better self. And that story is the forgiveness. That's it. That's what it is. It's the story of finding your better self. And that's the forgiveness. Then it's gone. The blame and the hostility and the hatred, it disappears when you have, as you develop, the story of, well, you know, this is how I move forward. So I will close with just a very brief explanation of why it is that I'm here. Now, just my own story was, I was very deeply wounded. This is a couple of decades ago, by my closest friend, and I was betrayed. And I was miserable for years, because, you know, just like many of you, you have seen how raw and vulnerable you can be from human life. And you can't protect yourself. And so I was devastated by this very painful experience of betrayal and abandonment. And I suffered for years. Until what happened is my partner told me to grow up. That's the truth. But I did. And I developed the Stanford Forgiveness Project out of it. And I've now helped hundreds of thousands of people. And I had to find a better story than my life is ruined, or this is terrible. And my story was cultivating what I'm doing. There's got to be something I can do with this. And so I guess what I'm inviting you to do as I finish is come up with your story that gives you hope. And then as you create it, you let go of identifying yourself as a victim. I thank you very much.